everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for joining our show again. Today, we're going to deal with a number of important legal issues that are affecting your daily lives. And today, I'll be joined by the superstar panel of attorney Milton Grimes, the famous lawyer from LA, who started the revolution in terms of videotaping and police misconduct. And our crack research analyst, Vanita Banks, master in tax, just a brilliant lawyer in cybersecurity. But before we get started, the big news of this week in the United States, we had the invasion, of course, in a foreign country, but the big news in our country dealt with the elevation of an African-American woman to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court, folks, was started by the Judiciary Act of 1789 and its first assembly in 1790. It was until sometime in the 1960s, almost 2 centuries later, almost 2 centuries went by, they had all white males on the U.S. Supreme Court. And then in the 60s, we had Lyndon Baines Johnson as president. We had the great civil rights legislation was passed, and we had our first Black Thurgood Marshall appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And unfortunately, he passed, and another guy was appointed to replace him. But now we have the one and only Katja Brown that's just nominated by President Biden, and we hope and pray that she gets through the process. We'll start out with Attorney Banks. What do you think about Katja Brown?
Good morning, Attorney Lee and Grimes. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and thanks so much for having me. I thought yesterday was simply a historic moment for America and for our democracy. And Justice Katja Brown Jackson, she is the epitome, the embodiment of the American dream. She has extraordinary, impeccable credentials, temperament, experience as a trial judge. She served as a public defender. She has been successfully vetted and confirmed 3 times before the United States Senate. One, her appointment to the U.S. Sentencing Commission. She was also appointed to the D.C. trial court. And within the last less than a year, 362 days, I understand, she was successfully confirmed to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, where she currently sits. And that is the second most powerful court, second only to the United States Supreme Court. And as you stated, Attorney Lee, in the 233-year history of the U.S. Supreme Court, there have been 115 Supreme Court justices. 108 of them have been white men, 5 have been women, and 2 have been African American. We have, of course, the great Thurgood Marshall and Clarence Thomas, who I understand is the longest serving Supreme Court justice. She's a Harvard grad, graduating from both Harvard Law School as well as Harvard University Undergraduate School. She is the former clerk of Justice Breyer, and she has served as a public defender, and she has both public and private practice service. She understands how the law impacts everyday people. And yesterday, again, was a historic moment for women, for Black women, for women lawyers, and for all Americans.
Attorney Grimes?
What can I say after that briefing by Sister Banks? Thank you, Vanita, for that background on Justice Jackson. I'm elated. I'm elated that he stepped forward and appointed her because he had some great choices, great choices. I am appreciative of the fact that she is a former federal public defender, because I have several friends who are federal public defender. And thankfully, they are really into their work and they fight hard for their clients, and they know the inequities and the unfairness of the criminal justice system, which unfortunately many of our people are confronted with and experience. So she brings to the table a different background and experience. I understand from reading some material on her yesterday that her brother was at one time a police officer, and then he joined the armed service and went on 2 tours. I don't know if it was Afghanistan or Iraq, but she has some African-American experiences in her background. She has 2 African-American daughters, as she has had by a successful Black physician. So I think she brings something to the table that we haven't seen on that court before since Thurgood Marshall. The present person on there that they say is African-American, that's only in skin tone. That person goes in every direction he can except for laws that would elevate and benefit his people. That person is led, I don't know if he's led by his spouse, but his spouse is way to the right and is given credit for a lot of influence to him. And if we had a conflict of law application or rule to the Supreme Court, I believe that man should remove himself from a lot of decisions that his wife has had a hand in. So it's unfortunate that we let some people pass on the conflict of law, which I think is obvious, but that person has passed, and his wife is a severe advocate against a lot of equitable laws that could come into existence. So I'm sure she influences him. But in any event, on the positive side, with Justice Jackson, I was thinking, I'm reading this book, How the Word is Passed, by a guy named Clint Smith. And he talks about the Whitney plantation in Louisiana and how he's trying to unveil a lot of the history coming through that particular plantation, whereas it was known for a breeding ground. They pride themselves on African-American slave women breeding, almost a child a year, Nate. Some women breeding 12, 15 children in every year, 1 child a year. And that was its purpose, to breed more slaves for a factory of making baby slaves and snatching those babies away from their mother. And so here we have a Black mother who's going to be on the Supreme Court. And it's just a circle that I'm glad I'm able to see in my lifetime.
I had a front row seat to history being made. It was in February of 2020, and it was during the South Carolina debate. Then former Vice President Joe Biden got beat up pretty badly in Iowa and Massachusetts in those early primary. His funding was running low, and I watched this whole ordeal unfold on the stage. And there was a lot of the first time the debate came out, the issue of this appointment of a Black woman to the Supreme Court was an issue. But the second round of debate, Joe Biden came out and said that if I'm elected, I will appoint a African-American woman to the U.S. Supreme Court. Everybody applauded it. And I think that was one of the key promises made that was kept that propelled him to get a record amount of vote in South Carolina. It turned the political tide. Ultimately, he ran the table in Super Tuesday and became the president of the United States. So most people don't give him credit, but I salute the president for promise made, promise kept. He promised to get jobs. This president, I must add, under his leadership, the first 12 months in the history of America, we have a president created almost 7 million new jobs. Never happened in American history. I saw the poll numbers are down, but the promises that this president made to get out of Afghanistan, all the promises he made, I've been crossing them out. This was one of the key promises he made and he kept. So he made about 6 key promises and I did a check mark. They've all been accomplished. Now, the Build Back Better plan, a miniature version was done. We see a record amount of money going into our local community. There was a big debate during the presidential election. Some people came out and said, let's defund the police. I don't know what the heck that means. But here's what happened. When legislation was advanced, I noticed the Democrat put more money into policing that the Republican voted against. So the reason that's important is I think that all you listeners, this is something, one of the biggest significant appointment in the history of American democracy. We have 3 co-equal branches of government. Never before in American history have we had a presidential candidate making a promise of this bold, and he kept it. So I'm very proud as an American to see that we have a president who makes a promise and keep it. And I think that this candidate is truly outstanding. And we got to remember, this candidate has better credentials than any of these other candidates that was appointed by the prior administration. I mean, she's got an outstanding credentials. She's a federal appellate court judge. She was a federal law clerk for the Supreme Court judge. So she has these credentials that are impeccable. Let's just hope and pray that she don't get derailed in the appointment process. And so we ask everybody to call your senators and make sure they vote this qualified candidate in. And hopefully do it as fast as they did Amy Barrett, 30 days before the election.
You know what impresses me about her too, Vanita and Nate, is her high school friends acknowledge her superior intellect and judgment. Back in high school, they praised her. She has been praised in every walk. At Harvard, she stood out amongst the students as a person who advocated for her people and was for people, period, and was well spoken. Not like Kavanaugh, who drank his way through high school and college and got away with it with that appointment. It's just that she's pristine, and it should be an easy thing to do to get her appointed, but there are some conservatives probably who will try to stand in her way just because she's Black. So expect that.
Well, the second issue, and we had some seismic drop of legal justice that occurred this week, and there was 2 important cases that reached a verdict. I need to look at both of these cases because in my mind, they're both historic. You know yourself dealing with Rodney King case, how difficult it was to obtain conviction. I know you had some prosecutor malpractice out there basically, but how difficult it's been historically to secure conviction for police misconduct.
Yes.
It's a rarity in American justice system.
Yes.
And then so we had a wannabe police officer in Arbery trial get convicted of hate crime, but the other case that was equally important was the George Floyd case, where the 3 officers who watched George Floyd get murdered by a confessed murderer now, and the jury returned a guilty verdict on their bystander liability, which I think was significant.
Right. Well, it was more than just bystander. 2 of them helped hold George Floyd down, held his feet and was on his back and assisted in the restraining of him. The other one was the lookout. But it was always my position, Nate, and even sitting on the diocese with other civil rights lawyers, that we should sue the officers who stand by and watch the perpetration of civil rights violations on minority people or anyone, and sue them too, because they are not performing their duty to protect and to serve. I remember down in St. Louis, I got into a bit of debate with some colleagues about, well, you just can't sue them because they're too far removed from it. No, they are there and they have a job to do, and they should enforce their position and protect and serve. So I am so glad to see the bystander officers, including the one that was on lookout keeping the crowd back. They participated in the killing of George Floyd. They aided and abetted in the criminal use of the words to the death of George Floyd. Had they been street people or a quote gang or any civilians, they would have been charged criminally with the aiding and killing of George Floyd. So they should have been found guilty. And I'm glad to see that happen, because too many times the ones, like in the King case, there were 27 officers out there by count that night when he was being beaten. My position was back then we should sue the other 23 officers, not just the 4 that were charged criminally, but the others who stood around and ordered coffee and donuts and watched that beating for damn near a minute and a half when he was hit 56 times with that baton. They were all responsible for that beating. And I just never understood why we were not filing civil rights claims against those other officers. So I'm glad to see that.
And of course, Attorney Grimes, these 3 officers will be standing trial, I believe in June, on charges that they aided and abetted murder and the manslaughter of George Floyd. This was, of course, the hate crime case in which the jury took 8 hours of deliberations in finding all 3 of these officers guilty of violating George Floyd's civil rights by, 1, depriving him of the right to medical care, right, and breaching their duty to protect and serve. And 2 of the officers were also convicted of failing to intervene to stop Derek Chauvin from his murderous actions of holding his knee on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes. And so all 3 of these men were found guilty of violating George Floyd's civil rights. And that's the purpose of the hate crime laws. So I am also happy to see these verdicts this week. Again, historic from my perspective.
You know, Ms. Banks.
Let me add one thing that's important. For our listeners, there's an important legal principle here that I must warn you about. The reason that the George Floyd officers all met justice is something that was first done in the Rodney King case. That is, as a bystander, you could legally videotape the misconduct, but you can't intervene. Remember, those officers have guns, they have batons, they have PSC repellent, so they have weapons that could kill you. But your remedy as a citizen is keep a safe and secure distance, videotape the entire event, document what's occurring. You could also use your phone to call for backup police officers, try to get somebody, a supervisor at the scene. But the one thing you can't legally do, you can't intervene. Because if you intervene, then if any of those bystanders would have attacked the cop then could have used force on them, maybe even deadly force. And so I warn you, these bystanders, they're heroes in my mind, Attorney Banks and Grimes, because those citizens did the right thing. They documented it, and they came to court. They gave great testimony. I thought that was those witness testimony was the best I've seen in any type of criminal prosecution. They were absolutely wonderful. They were well prepared, and they looked at the videotape and they document everything. So citizen, make sure that you document these type of misconduct. Go ahead, Attorney Banks.
I believe that was Attorney Grimes, but again, the jury rejected the arguments that were made on behalf of these officers, that they were, inexperienced and they had improper training. And one of the officers stated, he testified that he was unable to intervene because he was trying to control the crowd. And his attorney argued that his actions or inaction didn't meet the definition of willful conduct, which requires a bad purpose or motive. But the jury rejected those arguments.
Yeah, it aided and assisted what the officer with his knee on his neck for 9 minutes plus was doing. It kept people from coming to his aid and rescue. And I take difference with you, brother, in what a bystander obligation and duty is. I understand why you say that, but if my child's life was in the hands of a killing officer, it would be hard not to resist not interfering some way, somehow, some shape, some form. I know the people were yelling and screaming at him, at them to let the man breathe. But I don't know. I think every case depends on itself and every circumstance has to be looked at. But a hard and fast, watch somebody be killed in 9 minutes, I don't know what options are available. Spray them with the water hose, throwing trash. I don't know. But I would hate for a loved one to go through a 9-minute killing and something not be done. I'm not passing judgment on what was or wasn't done, but just putting myself there. And my son died, I guess, because the police would not let the paramedics get to him suffering a heart attack on the street because he hadn't been frisked. He hadn't been searched for a weapon. And the people were begging the officers to let the paramedics attend to him. So that scene carries a great deal of pain with it to me. And maybe I'm being personal when I look at it and give the belief that there are other options available to bystanders, that we have to step up and apply.
Unfortunately, though, there are statutes in almost every state that make it a felony to interfere by arresting an officer. The current state of law give bystanders a very limited amount of remedies. The problem you get into, though, if you interfere, you run the risk of being shot, at a minimum, being arrested, but they all carry guns.
I recognize all of those things, the statutes, the problems, the felony, but if you see somebody doing wrong, I think my law tells me that you should try to help.
Okay.
And you got to face consequences. I represented a homeless lady here in LA that is one of my heroes. And she tried to protect a young man who was being beaten by the police, and the officer dropped the baton and she picked the baton up. They took her down before you could blink your eye, but she tried to do something. Everybody else, the men were standing around down there on Skid Row. They yelling and screaming at the officers, and they ended up shooting this guy 4 times, killing him. But she tried, she tried to do something. And so I'm sorry.
Did they prosecute the officer in that case?
Oh, no.
They didn't have video footage of it.
They had some video footage of it, but the commission cleared them.
Well, that's one of the problems. See, one of the problems that we face in America, when we look at that Breonna Taylor case in Louisville and places like that, rarely, if ever, do officers get prosecuted for misconduct. And that's one of the weaknesses in our system. Then we have even when you sue them now, the U.S. Supreme Court has expanded the concept of what is called this fake defense of qualified immunity. So even when they commit a criminal offense like that, in a civil case, in most of the cases now, the cases get dismissed out on the issue of qualified immunity, which is a judicially created phantom legal defense that has been running amok. And it's just terrible. We have, here in Indianapolis, we have the worst qualified immunity defense in the country in the case of Dave versus City of Indianapolis. So the point is that in the Day case, we did have bystanders that videotaped it, and they were outraged as the kid died. But unfortunately, the law as it exists would make it a felony if the bystanders would intervene. So that's something to consider.
If they intervene, Nate, and the officers are doing something wrong, are you still committing a felony, or are you saying you're committing a felony just because it's a police officer and they have the right to do wrong?
Well, the police officer standard is different than the ordinary citizen. They get the benefit of the doubt.
I know that.
And unfortunately, the courts, particularly now in some of the decision, there was just a lot of these cases that came before the court the last couple of years. And in every case, except I think in the appellate court, there has been some really great decisions. We had the judge in the Fourth Circuit. You remember that case we talked about last year? It was just a phenomenal decision. But by and large, we've not seen a lot of these officers come to justice. Now, this week you're
talking about the Jones case in West Virginia?
Yeah, that was a great decision. And right. I was just really proud of that decision. That judge was African-American chief judge.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's great. Now,
he said he's tired of this. This enough is enough.
Yeah, yes. I know it. He just phenomenal judge. My only regret is that he was not put on the Supreme Court at an earlier date when he was younger, because he would have been an outstanding jurist for the court and a great advocate for justice and accountability. Now, moving forward, we also had that verdict in the racial hate crime of the Martin Arbery case down in South Georgia. And I've watched, that case was not televised. And so the only thing I was able to see on that case was the press clippings on that case. But it was disturbing to me, some of the things that these three defendants had said. They had this hatred and bigotry. And it was just stunning to me that they hated Blacks so bad until it would just let them to go out and chase down a person and treat him like he was game or something. It was just a terrible incident. Well, and I was just very gratified to see that they got convicted in both the state and the federal case, and that hopefully they spend the rest of their lives, whatever left of it, in prison.
Well, I recall, I thought someone said that the father and son were upset with their female member of their family, the daughter and sister, and that she was dating an African-American man, and that they traced that to possibly being a motivation by them to be angry at African-Americans, one of their motivations. Is that true?
I think it was Rodney Bryan, the third guy, his daughter was dating. I had to look at the press clipping on it, was dating an African-American. But what was weird about that case, I talked to the mother before the video came out, early on in the process. My first thought process would go out and try to look at, now everybody have those cameras on their doors, and the idea is to see whether or not somebody had a videotape of it. Just so happened the criminal defendant was dumb enough to release the video thinking that somehow it would exonerate him. And so thank God that he did that, because but for the videotape of the incident, I guess you can rest assured, what would have been the odds of them being prosecuted if you didn't have the videotape? You've been an experienced criminal lawyer. Would they have been exonerated or not even charged?
My client was in fear that this man had a weapon, and he was out of his neighborhood, and he was coming after them, and he was charging them, of course. Without that video, I don't think the evidence would have been as strong against them as it was.
I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, you'll recall that it took over 70 days for these three men to even be arrested in this case. But for the video, they would not have been charged. But more importantly, but for the insistence and the love of an African-American mother who refused to allow her vindication and accountability, because we'll never achieve justice for the life of Ahmaud Arbery, because true justice would mean that he would be with his family today. But she persisted through finally obtaining the arrest and conviction of these men in state court. And she insisted that they be actually tried for the hate crime of actually hunting down Ahmaud Arbery, her son, and killing him in broad daylight. And she refused to take a plea. And I know we discussed this in an earlier show, because like Miss Tillman, she wanted the world to see what had happened to her son. And so she, in essence, persisted until accountability was achieved.
One of the things that has happened in our country, though, in the last 200 years, rarely as ever have we actually had the federal government actually prosecute citizens or racist folks for hate crimes. It's a rare occurrence. I was looking at the stats on that. It was a very low percentage of cases get filed, even though they have evidence, because the government in the past has said maybe they made the unilateral decision that they did not have enough evidence to convict the person of the crime. But ironically, when the people were charged and actually tried, they did secure conviction like 9 out of 10 times. So the point is that we're just happy that the government is taking on these cases now, because I think they're important. It's important in our American judicial system that we adhere to this principle that no person, no man or woman is above the law. So when we elevate police officers to a status that immune them from criminal liability, immune them from civil liability, we do damage to that principle in our American democracy. You know, that's what make America exceptional. We have a system that's unique. Our civil justice system is regarded as the best in the world. Our criminal justice system, I think, lacks some fundamental safeguards. So moving forward, though, if we as a country continue to hold folks accountable for these heinous type criminal misconduct, the world and the country will be a better place.
I believe that what we're seeing is a reaction to the public pressure that has been brought upon the quote system. I think to mystify what's happened by saying it's the system sometimes takes away the true picture. And that is, it's an individual or 2 or 3 individuals making these great decisions that affect all of us. That's the system. And a lot of these individuals are racists or white supremacists to their heart. They got sheets in their closet, and they are not to put on their bed, it's to put on their head. And that's who is in our justice system. A lot of racist judges, like the judge in Fairfax County said he wasn't trying another black man in his courtroom because he know that they can't get a fair trial. And until all these white men pictures are taken down from the walls, there'll be no more trials in his courtroom. So that's a recognition of what this system really is. It is an individual standing up for what is right, Nate. Some of these judges, I've been before them in the last week in LA. I know what's in their heart because they let it out with their demeaning, with their attitude, with their condescending and statements involved in their rulings. It comes out of them. It's there. That's what we're dealing with. And so now some of them across the country have to be faced with, whoa, I got to back off of this one, partner. I got to let this one, because they got too many eyes on me. You know what I'm saying? Even if I ain't running for re-election or something, I can't, my kids can't go home with this one. You understand? So I think public reaction, whether a parent cries or not, there've been a lot of grieving parents over the years and they got nowhere. But because of Black Lives Matter and another approach to this injustice, we're finally getting little pieces here and there. That's my belief. And that's what I've seen with my study or my viewing and my keeping up as best I can with what's happening. The Rodney King case is a perfect example of it. It's like, yeah, for a brief period of time there, for a week or two, everything was changing. They got a new police chief. They got this and they got that. But in a couple of weeks, they went back to the same old thing. So that's my take on it, brothers. I believe the public has to demand justice, and that's what's happening.
Absolutely. And when the world watched with their own eyes George Floyd being murdered in broad daylight, that was the latest, one of the latest inflection points. And advancement in technology, we've been talking about, you know, the fact that but for these videos, justice would not have been done. And I still want to emphasize the power of a praying mother and call Wanda Cooper Jones's name, the mother of Ahmaud Arbery, and her insistence, as she stated in the press conference after the jury's verdict, she made the Department of Justice do their job. They did not want to try that case, but she insisted that they do their job. And in the spirit of Emmett Till's mother, who refused to permit her child's vicious killing to go in vain, Wanda Cooper Jones is continuing her quest and will not rest until the prosecutors, one of which has been indicted in the case for obstruction, I believe is one of the charges. She's looking forward to those upcoming trials as well.
I was concerned, you know, that prosecutor down there, they did indict it, but, you know, one of the cases that started this week also down in Louisville, Kentucky was the Breonna Taylor case. Although they never charged the police officers with any type of crime for murdering Breonna Taylor, but the charge had to do with them shooting multiple times. I guess it frightened the white neighbor in another apartment. But what concerns me, I saw this mass demonstration and mass protests in Louisville playing out on TV on a regular basis. And I watched that and I was thinking to myself, why did these folks do a recall of the local prosecutor? It was the mayor who ran the police department. The local prosecutor could have filed charges against them, but he didn't. And that bothered me. They let the state take over, and that state AG I thought was worthless. But I was more concerned about the local prosecutor there in Louisville, Kentucky. And it just bothered me. That whole case, this doesn't sit well with me in terms of how they are pursuing justice. But it goes back to the old axiom, that is that very rarely do you have these type of cases filed against police officers across the country. Mm-hmm. Like Milton pointed out earlier, we've had a high level of citizen participation that is hopefully turned the tide. But we're not quite there yet. We still have this injustice that permeates our society. So, but the key to that is that we got to make sure we go out to vote to get rid of these bad actors that are involved in our system.
And to your point, Attorney Lee, I read that the Department of Justice declines to prosecute 82% of all hate crimes that are reported, and they only move forward on 17%, of the cases. And again, Ahmaud Arbery's mother refused to accept a plea in her son's case. And I guess maybe this is attributable to not having appropriate resources, or maybe these hate crimes are very, very difficult to prove. We know in the state court trial that race was not referenced at all, but in a federal hate crime case, crimes that are committed on the basis of a victim's characteristics, race, national origin, religion, and sexual orientation or gender. And so these cases are rarely brought. The Department of Justice has stated that it will increase resources to expeditiously review these cases, and it is anticipated that we may be seeing more hate crime cases move forward in the future. We'll see.
When you make tea, if you use the same bag for the second cup of tea, the tea is going to be weaker. Now, my metaphor goes with this. I saw it, Vanita, in the Rodney King case in Simi Valley. They did not put Rodney King on the witness stand to testify because the DA, whom I talked to, said he was too angry. I said, well, you'd be angry too if you got beat like that and you've been humiliated like that. He said, yeah, but we thought we could prove it without him. You can prove this case without the live victim testifying. It switched to the federal set. And they did not know that they had a tape recording of him 22 hours after the beating, interviewed by Internal Affairs. They didn't know that until I said, well, I got your discovery here. And in this report, it says that Internal Affairs interviewed him at 11 o'clock that night, some 22 hours after his beat. He said, no, I don't think so. I said, well, let me get back to you because I always doubt myself. So I went back through the discovery again. So 3 days later, I called him. I said, yeah, this 3-page report here, I just want the tape recording. The man on the speakerphone said, wait a minute, Milton, let me look at this. Oh, yeah, here's an envelope from Internal Affairs. He said, oh, yeah, there is a tape in here. So they went to trial, didn't even know they had a tape recorded interview of King by Internal Affairs, and didn't put him on the stand. In the federal court, they put King on the stand because I was able to convince the U.S. attorney he's okay. Yeah, he's upset about it, but he's not so angry that he can't testify and tell what happened. And they put him on the stand, and he was an excellent witness. So these cases, I've seen them be handled, and it looks like they're being handled by high school freshmen as opposed to a seasoned lawyer sometimes. Now, I don't know if that's planned by design or accidental, but I know that happens.
Well, from my biggest gripe about the Justice Department is that they have very minimal amount of diversity. And
right.
Currently, they've been appointing a lot of African-American U.S. attorneys, so hopefully they could fix this problem. My thought process is the number one reason why they did not prosecute more of these hate crimes, not because of evidence or staff, it's just because they don't believe it. They identify more so with the people that are committing the hate crime than the victim. Right. And so my concern was that we need to have a much higher level of diversity in those important positions. I think that the goal should be, because 30-some% of the country now are minorities, I think that about 30-some% of the Justice Department should be the same way. But at the local level, there may be an office of 60 attorneys, they may have 1 or 2 African Americans, no Hispanic. So I think that we have to focus our attention to make sure that they get a fair amount of diversity in these important positions so that when somebody come in, the lawyer can identify with the victim and not just necessarily the person who committed the criminal offense. I'm not accusing them of that, but that's just the reality of what the offshoot of what I'm seeing occurring. And so you see so many of these cases whereby there's some prosecution, you just scratch your head. And there's other cases, they don't do anything about it. And it's just troublesome to me. But one thing about our justice system, though, is that the wealthy person usually get a better shot at justice than a person that's poor. And that's just a reality of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, Nate, that's unfortunate is the truth.
Now, the other issue is there's one more issue along this line. I was trying to think this week, Attorney Banks had pointed out that there was invasion of Ukraine by Russia and Putin. And I watched a superpower attack a weaker nation and horror. And my concern is that, are we at the precipice of World War III, or is this going to be an isolated event? What are your thoughts?
It's going to be an event that's going to affect us, whether it's World War III, quote, or not. I was reading yesterday some op-eds about how this affects our economy and how prices are going to be driven up, oil prices, food prices. It's going to be an effect that excuse me, that's going to make our lifestyle change and what we can do change, whether we go over there with more troops and actually take up arms against Russia, which I hope we don't do, because I'd hate to see us go to World War III. I don't think that should be just a, easily talked about, because I see some damage to all of us if that happens. I don't know what to do about it, but seems to be a possibility.
I hope not, but it's possible that we're on the brink of World War III. And as I was taking a look at this, you were hearing a lot of talk about NATO. And so the question becomes, what is NATO and what does that stand for? NATO is the North Atlantic Organization, and it consists of 30 it's a 30-member alliance, and it was formed in the wake of World War II with the goal of protecting democratic freedoms. There are 27 countries, including the US and Canada, and European nations as well. And there's one Eurasian country that's a member of NATO as well. And so when we look back to before 2014, but certainly in 2014, Putin advanced on Ukraine and actually annexed Crimea. And he is engaging in war, has declared war against Ukraine. We are witnessing a humanitarian and refugee crisis as we speak. Over 5 million people may be displaced. 50,000 Ukrainians may be killed or wounded. And while what we're seeing suggests that they're very brave and they intend to defend their country. And by the way, they've been in talks with NATO over the years. I was looking at the UN ambassador to Ukraine, her remarks yesterday that they have been in discussions to join NATO for some time,
Right.
but that's something that Putin is desperately opposed to.
Why doesn't he want them to join NATO, Vanita?
Well, he's mesmerized by Stalin. He's addicted to the ruthless use of power, and he wants to expand Russian territory. It's just really that simple.
But it doesn't add any more danger to them from Ukraine if they are a member of NATO, correct?
Well, it's not the danger. He just doesn't want to see the spread of democracy. He's an autocrat. He's an authoritarian leader. And he's interested in expanding, his
power. All right.
And he doesn't want, the Soviet Union to be cut up, in any more pieces. And again, trying to maintain power in his mind.
Okay, a couple
What
of
do you
people.
think, Nick?
Well, wait a second. A couple people sent some text to us that we had to close out in a minute. They, on this discussion, they had questioned about the Zimmerman case who shot the kid down in Florida in 2012, and they want to know why he was not prosecuted federally. They also want to know who makes a decision in the U.S. Attorney's Office locally. The answer is the local U.S. attorney generally make the prosecution decision on local matters, and they're given authority by the federal government to be in charge of matters in their jurisdiction. So I'd like to thank each and every one of our special guests today, Attorney Grimes and Attorney Banks, who always provide wisdom and guidance on important legal issues. I'd like to thank each and every one of you, our viewing audience. But join us again. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and we'll be discussing important legal issues of the day at that time. Thank you, and may God bless and keep you until we talk once again.
Thank you, Nathaniel.
Thank you.